Welcome to Rotting Jewels. My name is Dana. For new visitors, I have almost 2 years worth of what I refer to as active research on the topic we're going to discuss today on my YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description along with my link tree. We are going to continue a very long journey of challenging the public consumption narratives of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. You may have heard of them, or may know them under their modern-day iteration, the Best Friends Animal Society, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. In order to challenge the aforementioned public consumption narrative, as in the narrative spoon-fed to the public, we need an idea of how they came to be, what they believe, what they strike down as satanic panic conspiracy theories, and why they tried to distance themselves from the humble 37,700-acre animal sanctuary tucked away in what was once referred to as Little Hollywood in Kanab, Utah. We continue this journey by asking one question.
What is the process?
Oh, must we drag all that up again?
Is it old to the death? Better hold your breath. In the cell, I prevail. Freddy said from hell, ring the bell when you're finished. I'm a grown man and winning. Sacrificing to the demons. Know I love it when you screaming. Commit to your thought. Do it now what you lost in the darkness. You will never wake up so conscious, anxious. Why are you so scared of feeling pain, bitch? Devil in your soul, cutting now and then you'll go. Walk on the dark path, kill and you feel that. Never in your life you gotta rush from the kickback. Matt blank, Glock 10, knock on the neck, man. Hear the whispering, devil taking over them. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair? Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. All red on me, got the blood up in your hair. Sign your soul to the devil, now you asking is it fair?
Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work. Listen to my words of Freddy telling do the devil's work.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left without telling any of his superiors about it. The FBI campaign lasted from 1968 until 1971, when Mr. Hoover ended it. He ordered his agents not only to expose New Left groups, but to take action against them to neutralize them. The memos were made public because the government lost a lawsuit filed by NBC News correspondent Carl Stern under the Freedom of Information Act. Here is Stern's report on the secret FBI memos.
Today, we are going to take a cursory view of the global student uprisings starting in 1968 and the role of the Process Church of the Final Judgment in what some call the beginning of the end. Depending on who you ask, the Cielo Drive murders ended the Summer of Love. Others say the Students for a Democratic Society and its terrorist offspring, the Weatherman Underground, ended the counterculture movement.
Columbia University President Grayson Kirk today demanded the immediate return of papers he claims were stolen when students occupied his office during their week-long sit-in. Meanwhile, a 5-man independent commission opened its investigation yesterday into the causes of the student protest, a protest that is still going on.
Either way, I don't view the Weathermen's public adoration of Charles Manson as an edgy position. I view it as an acknowledgement of these groups working together, knowingly and unknowingly, towards one goal: chaos.
I think the idea was always that we were catalysts of the end. By simply announcing it, it would make people realize that there was no hope.
Just as the full truth isn't known about the process today, possibly because of the power it holds under Best Friends Animal Society, the same can be said for the SDS and Weather Underground.
I've been looking into the political situation in Chicago, where Barack Obama rose to prominence. Obviously, his association with Reverend Wright has hurt him. And there's also been bad publicity about William Ayers and Bernadette Dorn, two radicals associated with the violent Weather Underground back in the 60s. In 1998, Connie Chung spoke with Ayers and Dorn on ABC News.
A lot of people out there are probably saying, I would love to hear them say we were young, we were idealistic, we were foolish, and we were probably stupid, we made mistakes, and we're sorry about it. We're grown up now.
I'll say we were young, we were idealistic, we were romantic, we were foolish, we made mistakes.
And we'd do it again.
And
I wish that we'd done more. I wish we'd been more militant. I wish a lot of things.
I am of the opinion that the full truth of this group is far from being known because of its modern-day presence. This will not be an extensive history of the SDS or Weathermen. I am here to posit one question. Why does the process only acknowledge shacking up with the SDS in Germany when I've found them present at the Columbia campus?
Is SDS, Mark, really interested in Columbia, or is it just a stepping stone? Are you concerned with something much bigger than Columbia? Why did you use Columbia, or did you use Columbia?
I say that neither is true, or both are true. So what it is a training ground, or not only a training ground, but one that has immediate relevance.
The Columbia University confrontation, according to its SDS leader, Mark Rudd, was a training exercise, and the goal, the takeover by violence of the United States. According to a Los Angeles Times report, December 22, 1968, and I quote, "At the height of the student rebellion at Columbia, an SDS leader was approached by worried moderates who objected to reported plans for using clubs and gasoline against the police. They were told very clearly, quote, 'You liberals don't understand what the scene is all about. It is about power and disruption. The more blood, the better.' End of quote."
I think it's worth mentioning here to keep in the back of your mind what was going on in New Orleans in the years leading up to this with Guy Bannister and his merry crew of anti-communist wandering bishops. We're going to start with Timothy Wiley from Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. Process chapters flourished temporarily in Hamburg, Rome, Munich, and Paris. Wherever we could rely on selling a few books and making some contacts, our euphemism for trying to get close to the rich and famous. The infamous and the controversial always drew us too, since we felt ourselves to be earnest combatants against the grey forces of mediocrity. We were even put up for a few weeks in Germany by the SDS, the radical students, who, I suspect, admired our uniforms a great deal more than they appreciated our message of the doom and devastation to come. And that's it. That's all that Timothy Wiley gives us in Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. If you're like me, you don't buy that that's the whole story. From rebel angels in exile, Pleiadians, Watchers, and the spiritual quickening of humanity, striving to make a success of Balfour Place while the Omega was away, many of the community's senior members were hard hit emotionally when the message came down from the top that it was time for their organization to uproot and move. This was made even more pointed in Meinhost's case. He'd been chosen to be one of the half a dozen members who would be sent out in pairs, ranging through Europe to find this ultimate center that Marianne had conjured up in her ambitious imagination. In this endeavor, Meinhost was paired up with Nicholas, a street kid from San Francisco, barely 20 years old. Nothing concrete came of their months of hitchhiking around France, Germany, and Italy, nor from all the meandering trails they took trying to find their new center. I could see it was a pointless quest. Finding a place that would comfortably house 40 to 50 people, together with an assembly hall and the ancillary rooms required to service such a place, was never going to be a straightforward task. Expecting not to have to pay for it was a challenge of quite a different order. This idea that the right place was out there just waiting for the process to come along, and they'd be recognized, and the right place would somehow be gifted to them, was one of Marianne's more grandiose conceits, an arrogance that proved over time to be as unrealistic as I'm sure it must seem to the reader. The process would move around a great deal over the ensuing 9 years, and Meinhost was frequently the one sent ahead to locate one of these right places. So he was in a good position to see how this concept actually played out in real time. There were some rare occasions when the right place was found, but far more frequently the place found became the right place. This brief European trip, however, would yield neither option. Timothy Wiley is either being cheeky or deceptive or both. We're going to read a more detailed account of their time with the SDS in Germany. And I do find it odd that in one breath he's saying that this European tour was of no success, yet they set up flourishing chapters, some of them more controversial than others, Rome anybody, and he and the aforementioned Nicholas have a curiously timed run-in with the Cardinal Bishop, Francesco Carpino, of Vatican II. You'll remember we touched on Vatican II for just a second talking about New Orleans, after they happened to wander around and definitely find nothing in Aleister Crowley's Abbey of Thelema in Cefalù. Let's see if we can get some more detail out of these people about just what happened with the SDS in Germany. We're going to be reading the Process Archives by Alessandro Papa. At one point, Marianne McLean wanted to enter into a relation with the leader of the American Nazi Party, George Lincoln Rockwell.
We are not out to liquidate the Jews. We are out to liquidate communist traitors. Unfortunately, too many Jewish atheists, not religious Jews, but too many religious atheist Jews are mixed up in communism. That's our only concern with the Jews. And as for turning us into a fascist nation, that's untrue too. Fascism is essentially an economic doctrine that has to do with a corporate state. We don't believe in a corporate state. We believe in free enterprise. What we are is Nazis, which means basically that we are racists. We believe in preserving a white nation, a white Christian nation, for the white Christian people who built it.
In his book, Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, Timothy Wiley recounts that, in August of 1967, he and the Jewish Father Michael were sent out on a mission to visit Lincoln Rockwell out of allegiance to Marianne's interest in extreme ideologies. The two processians went to the Nazi leader's militarized home after an unsuccessful attempt had been made on his life just 2 months previously. Father Micah and Father Michael held a short briefing about the process in front of an uneasy Lincoln Rockwell and his armed bodyguards. Marianne's desire to establish a friendship with the American Nazi leader came to nothing. Just a few days after the meeting with the two processians, Rockwell was assassinated, shot by an ex-member who had been expelled from the party. In spring of 1968, the process established a small chapter in Munich, Germany. In his book, Satan's Power, William S. Bainbridge states that the processians who joined the German chapter were very interested in the political situation because it was a time of considerable unrest. Father Lucius said the process was in search of intensity, so the Nazi mystique attracted them. They wanted to learn how Hitler could have happened to a country and whether similar forces were still at work. The tiny Munich chapter immediately made contact with both German political extremes, the leftist student SDS movement, and the pseudo-Nazi NPD political party. Both extremes, Lucius said, were very active. The processians traveled to Nuremberg, scene of Hitler's greatest public display, and to Coburg to view right-wing NPD rallies. They met Adolf von Thadden, leader of the party, and found him a very impressive man, a dignified, big, rather florid man with quite a lot of charisma. Father Lucius remembers one grand incident that illustrated the complex relationship between the cult and the political extremists. It expressed exactly the image the cult wanted to present and exactly the reception it sought. Father Malachi, Father Lucius, and Sister Bernadette decided to visit a right-wing rally that was being protested by a mob of left-wingers. They marched towards the meeting hall dressed in their all-black uniforms with flowing capes, 2 beards and 3 heads of long hair clearly visible.
We were very intense, and of course we were known for having a very strange sense of style as well. We started, with long black coats, and I think we had cowls as well, if I remember rightly.
The image was like us, we looked crazy and scary ourselves. Theirs was the same way, with the dogs, all the dogs, and the black robes and the big crosses on. They're like Harry Potters.
The SDS saw them coming and thought we were left-wing. We weren't left-wing, although we had a number of elements about us that people could have mistaken for left-wing. They saw us go into this rally and they thought this was terrific. Obviously, we were going in to disrupt it, so they cheered and clapped. Great performance, a lot of people. And when we went into this hall where they were having the rally, it was very orderly, all regimented. We walked down the center of the aisle looking for a seat, and everybody started cheering and waving. Of course, because we were in uniform, we looked right-wing.
And then there's these people wearing black, that reveled in using the word Satan.
The processions had a very almost fascistic kind of look to them. They looked like they were in uniform. They wanted to put the wind up all the flower power, hippie love and peace sensibilities.
We were very provocative, deliberately provocative.
We weren't interested in appealing to people. Good Lord, no.
Process doctrine had already begun to emphasize the idea that the extremes of human experience and expression were superior to mundane blandness, and that the extremes could be reconciled without dilution within the cult. The process display at the rally was a sort of transcendence of this absurd situation. One might say that Alessandro Papa provides a more well-orbed idea of what went on in Germany with the SDS and the process. I'm just going to throw this out there in regards to Timothy Wiley and this maybe being a little bit easier for the process than they're letting on. From The Awakening of the Watchers, The Secret Mission of the Rebel Angels in the Forbidden Quadrant, discussing his mother, Diana, he states, "It was Diana's ability to repress her reactive emotion that made her of value to MI6 as a British agent in Germany prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, and then later working at the top-secret Bletchley Park where the encryption codes of the Nazis' Enigma machine were finally broken. It was the same facility of hiding her true emotions that allowed her to appear so unconcerned and supportive of her son's unconventional choices." I have stated in an earlier episode that I have been able to verify independently that Diana Wiley did, in fact, work for British intelligence under the Ministry of Economic Warfare. He continues, "Although always modest about her accomplishments, she confided to her son, after the Official Secrets Act expired in the 1970s, about her trips into Germany counting troop buildings and tank movements, and having once to eat her written notes aboard a train on the way home." It's not an unfair question to posit that just Timothy Wiley's connections to British intelligence alone might have eased their movements, especially at such a tense time with these student uprisings.
No one can understand the degree of disunity, factionalism, and anarchy that exists within the Students for a Democratic Society until the radicals get together for a convention. It is, said one old SDSer, like a children's crusade gone mad.
As some of you may know, the Weather Underground bailed Timothy Leary out of jail.
This group, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, do you know who they are? They gave us a certain amount of money to break Leary out of jail and get him out of the country. They were a drug group, mainly LSD, that had Leary as their figurehead, and they had a lot of money.
Black Panther leader Eldridge Cleaver said that LSD advocate Timothy Leary, who escaped from a California prison last month, has joined forces with him in Algeria.
I escaped with the help of the Weathermen Underground. 25 of their crack underground operators came to California for 6 weeks before my escape, and it was a very complicated operation. They not only helped us escape, they spirited us to several of their underground stations with great efficiency. We want to tell the people of the United States the Third World War has begun. Join us in the fight for freedom, because we are everywhere, and we're happy, and we're free, and we're going to make the world free.
In order to understand the cross-pollination of the SDS, Weather Underground, and the process, we're going to read the 3 accounts that Timothy Wiley includes about the process's time with the good doctor. While this may be ungenerous of me, I don't believe in coincidences. And we're going to read some really weird stuff from Ed's files. I can't even preface it. From Love, Sex, Fear, and Death. I passed through the New San Francisco chapter quickly, spending perhaps a couple of weeks in that 67 summer of love, before being sent down to LA to look for an appropriate building for a chapter there. The only Bay Area memory that comes to me is of a sunny late afternoon with a companion. We now only went out in pairs, taking our 2 dogs out for a walk in one of the large parks. Masters had to start wearing long, flowing black robes in public at that point, with a large red cross sewn on the front. That phase didn't last long. The robes were simply too terrifying. I'd like to point out here this is another discrepancy in regards to their legal filings. They have not been incorporated yet. Continuing. So there we were, hair down to our waists, black robes wafting in the breeze, massive beasts straining on leashes, topping a sloping hill with a wintry sun behind us to see. stretching out before us in a gentle valley, thousands of people in colorful hippie garb, all sitting and standing as if waiting for something, and they were all looking up at us. A strange hush gradually fell over them. Quite conscious of the startling vision we must have presented, we stood still for several moments before descending with as much dignity as we could muster into a crowd which parted silently to allow us through. Much later I discovered that we had blundered into the famous human being on the afternoon and evening of January 14th, 1967, and the crowd that had gazed up at us were, in fact, waiting for Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, Gary Snyder, and other counterculture heroes to start speaking to them.
Turn on, tune in, drop out. I mean drop out of high school, drop out of college, drop out of graduate school.
For those that don't know, the human being was announced on the cover of the 5th issue of the San Francisco Oracle as a gathering of the tribes for a human being. Michael Bowen, art director of the Oracle, was the main organizer. Reading from Ringo Livio, A Life Played for Keeps by Emmett Grogan. Underground chemist Owsley Stanley provided massive amounts of his White Lightning LSD, specially produced for the event, as well as 75 20-pound turkeys for free distribution by the Diggers. The turkeys had been made into thousands of sandwiches under John John's supervision, and the bread was salted down with crushed acid. Gary organized the free distribution of the sandwiches to those who looked like they needed something to eat, physically or spiritually.
Turn on, tune in, drop out. For this crowd of hip young Americans, these 6 words are shorthand for an electrifying experience most of them know well, an experience called the trip. The trip is a drug-induced mental explosion that has changed their whole way of looking at the world. But for many other Americans, the 6 words stand for something else: controversy, crime, and terror. Turning on, tuning in, and dropping out is what happens to you when you take a dose of the strange new drug called LSD.
From JSTOR, also known as Journal Storage, Jeremy Guida. Organizers of the San Francisco BN intended for the event to bring together what they believed at the time were related but disparate movements: the lifestyle hippies of Haight-Ashbury and the politically oriented countercultural movement in Berkeley. The organizers of the event wanted these groups to become more familiar with one another, to see that they were of similar mindsets. They wanted them to simply be together. Larry Frodiger of Austin's The Rag writes of the BN, "The revolutionary and the asocial elements have long needed to bridge the artificial boundaries between them, and, judging from recent news, they've done it."
I was attending college at San Francisco State, and there was so much activism there. There was the Vietnam War, it was raging on, and the draft, and there was even a class on urban guerrilla warfare. How to do it. It got so out of control that they had to bring in the National Guard. What that made me be is like, I don't want to be part of the establishment. That's what's wrong. It's this whole system is wrong. So I was like ready for something else. So one day I was out here and I saw these 2 guys. They had a crowd around them. They were dramatic because they were head to toe black with black capes, and they had fire in their eyes. And they had these 2 dogs that were running around, loose, big German Shepherd dogs. One was named Satan because it was all black, and the other one was called Lucifer. It was all white. One of the people, he'd look around and then he'd yell, "Satan! Lucifer!" And it must have seemed like a total crazy person, but he was calling his dogs. It really spoke to me as something that I'd like to do. It wasn't just a message. It was an adventure that I could go on with them.
The second account with Dr. Leary he prefaces with meeting Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. Timothy Wiley writes, "How Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin invited us to stay with them until we found a larger situation, I can't recall. But this was the time of the birth of the Yippies, and Abby was in a high state of excitement. His marriage to Anita Kushner, herself a writer and prankster, seemed to inspire him to new heights of anti-war activism. He and others had just chucked handfuls of dollars down from the gallery of the New York Stock Exchange to the traders below. That most of the bills were fakes made it all the funnier when the traders scuffled with each other to grab at the falling notes. This was well before the Chicago 7, when Abby, Jerry, and the others became household names.
And I can see myself over the horizon engaging in those kinds of activities. Okay. And not like it the way that a guy, you know, like I'll grab the mic at SDS, say, everybody ought to buy a gun. I know the fucking kid's bullshit, because I like talk to him later, and he's like waiting to finish school and get his degree, you know, and he's like gonna wait a year till he gets that, and then he's gonna grab a gun. Well, that's bullshit.
Then they were just starting to become the leaders of the American counterculture. Abby was explosively funny, generous-spirited, and open-minded enough to tolerate us. Father Michael and I both had long hair, and yet we wore the uniforms of the Transylvanian military. As an aside from me, does anyone else think that's kind of weird? Moving on. We were completely in agreement with him about the sorry state of society, and yet our only response was to greet the end of the world and try to take care of our own. Neither Jerry nor Abby would have liked that much, but I don't remember Abby being judgmental, just that he enjoyed an intense discussion with people holding different points of view. Jerry was more suspicious of us. I suspect he saw us as Abby's project. People that Abby must have thought were even weirder than he. I didn't take to Jerry Rubin. I felt like he was playing a part, and it didn't surprise me when many years later he rejected his counterculture years. However, both apparently trusted us enough to take us along to a meeting that, I've since realized, was more significant than anyone could have known at the time.
Political pigs, your days are numbered. We are the Second American Revolution. We are winning. Yippee!
Gathered around in the smoky room of the East Village Other were John Wilcock, the paper's editor and a fellow Brit, Paul Krasner, the founder and editor of The Realist, Allen Ginsberg, Dr. Timothy Leary, Abby Hoffman, and Jerry Rubin, and perhaps one or two others whose names elude me. Michael and I were greeted without too much surprise, our black garb understood, I imagine, within the sartorial flamboyance of the times. I did catch a sly grin from Dr. Leary, the only one who appeared to notice the red Mendy's goats and the serpentine silver cross around our necks. The subject under discussion quickly became the upcoming Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, with Abby enthusiastically supporting the idea that it was a prime event to get the Yippies out there and known. He hadn't alerted the press about the stock exchange event and had regretted it afterwards. He was just starting to become the masterful media manipulator that was so striking throughout the Chicago 7's trial in 1969. The police in the various cities in which anti-war demonstrations were occurring were behaving with increasing savagery. A wave of resistance to the Vietnam War had been building for years, and the establishment's response in not only brutalizing the demonstrators, but in escalating the numbers being sent to the war simply increased the students' anger to the incendiary heat. Abby passionately argued for a real confrontation with the forces of law and order in such large numbers that the police would be overwhelmed, to harness the incredible anger the young were feeling and put it to good use. And it would all be televised. At worst, the police would have been seen for their barbarity, and what were a few heads bashed in compared to what the Yippies might achieve?
You mean eat your dinner, eat your pork and beans. I eat more chicken than any man ever seen, yeah, yeah. I'm a backdoor man. Don't you know, but the little girls understand. Well, I'm a backdoor man. I'm a backdoor man. Oh, baby, I'm a backdoor man. Don't you know, but the little girls understand.
And now, reading from Ed's files, Brother Michael of the Process and Abby Hoffman. On October 13th, 1971, I had lunch with Abby and a long stroll about Washington Square Park, during which we discussed, among many things, the Process Church of the Final Judgment. During the end of August of 1968, Abby Hoffman walked into the coffee house at the Lincoln Hotel on the south end of Lincoln Park in Chicago. It was early morning, and rigorous street demonstrations had been occurring during the nights previous, and TV and newspaper reporters were swarming about. In order to keep the TV cameras from filming him, Hoffman had painted a certain four-letter expletive denoting copulation on his forehead. Hoffman was arrested for this. His arrest was observed by me since I was staying in the Hotel Lincoln. Hoffman told me during our luncheon stroll on October 13, 1971, that he was paraded around from jail to jail in the Chicago jail system, and then was finally thrown into a cell with a naked, long-haired male Caucasian who remained totally silent for some time. Hoffman said that subsequent to his arrival, that he and the naked long-hair had a 20-minute staring stare-out, whereupon Hoffman snapped his fingers, and the naked long-hair began to talk. The naked person stated that he was Brother Michael of the Process. Hoffman claimed that thereupon, Brother Michael began to kiss Abby's feet and offered to perform an act of fellatio upon Mr. Hoffman. An offer refused by Mr. Hoffman. Me speaking. So, according to Abby Hoffman, the Process had no problem being Dirty Daniels at random. I would like to point out two other interesting facts about Abby Hoffman. Not that what he told Ed Sanders isn't interesting, but I also think that this information is worth including. From the Chicago Tribune, September 5th, 1968. Yippie leader is employee of the welfare unit. Abby Hoffman, a militant leader of the Youth International Party, Yippies, who came to Chicago during the Democratic National Convention, is a $100 a week employee of a municipal social welfare agency in New York City, the Tribune has learned. Hoffman's boss, Harold Johnson, 36, director of the agency, said he was well aware of Hoffman's militant activities in Chicago. He said he knew Hoffman had also played key roles in riots at Columbia University in New York City and the University of California at Berkeley, and had participated in several marches protesting police actions in New York. Why would you want to hire a militant like Hoffman? A reporter asked Johnson. We are conducting an experiment, Johnson said. We wanted to know if hippies would work, and we wanted to know if they would work with the establishment. So I think that that's kind of strange. And from the Mount Vernon Argus, Saturday, August 24th, 1974, this article is discussing the controversies surrounding Universal Life Church. Yes, the same one from Garrison's investigation. And wouldn't you know it, Abby Hoffman is a wandering bishop of Universal Life Church. No, you can't make this stuff up. Continuing with Timothy Wiley. Ginsburg, with his nonviolent ethos, didn't go for Abby's confrontational approach at all. He predicted a bloodbath if demonstrators tried to take the police head-on. The best thing would be to have a positive, joyful gathering, a festival of light, he suggested, to demonstrate the contrast with the militarization of the police. And so the discussion went on, neither point of view gaining consensus. At a certain point of impasse, heads turned to Michael and me. We were the outsiders. What did we think? With our doomsday view of the world at the time, we argued for confrontation.
In front of each of us, there was a large tin can and a spoon. And from time to time, we were asked to beat on these, making a terrible noise. We all chanted doom, death, destruction.
No specific agreement was achieved at that meeting, and it did highlight the polarity of views within the counterculture. However peaceful were the vast majority of demonstrators, were inevitably some who preferred to confront the police directly, so perhaps Abbey was right in the end. The 1968 Democratic Convention achieved exactly what he wanted. Mayor Richard J. Daley's fascistic overreaction. He ordered a shoot-to-kill policy, and the resulting ferocity of the police was caught on network TV, horrifying and further polarizing the nation. Abby and Jerry, along with 6 others, were arrested for conspiracy and inciting to riot, which resulted in giving them a platform for their ideas that America could not ignore. As the meeting broke up, Timothy Leary beckoned us over and, with a few well-placed questions, discovered who Michael and I were. Our spiel about uniting opposites must have struck a familiar nerve from his entheogenic research as well as his knowledge of esoteric teachings. His tanned face and wide grin were as welcoming as his optimism and generosity. He asked us what we did for money, and when we explained that we were essentially penniless wandering monks, he whipped out his wallet and gave us half of what was in there, perhaps $60 or $70, a substantial amount for wandering monks. Then it was off to dinner, invited by the good doctor to join Allen Ginsberg and a couple of the others at an Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. Fortunately, after all the celebrity pursuit in LA, Michael and I had become inured to the charisma of the famous and were well able to hold our own. I happily entertained Leary and Ginsberg with my stories of time spent with William Burroughs in Tangier and in London back in the late 50s. Me speaking. We will be returning to this because, would you believe it, dear listener? L. Ron Hubbard has an almost identical story about his time in Tangier with some of the very same people. We also have the strange antagonistic relationships of Yippie Paul Krasner, the Manson girls, Mae Brussel, and Leland Cole, the Grand Spook of Lower Bohemia, to discuss at a later date. In regards to Jerry Rubin, in his book We Are Everywhere, dedicated to the Weather Underground, he details meeting Charlie Manson in prison. I fell in love with Charlie Manson the first time I saw his cherub face and sparkling eyes on national TV. When I was out in LA on a speaking gig, Manson saw me on TV giving a rap and asked his lawyers to find me and bring me to see him in jail. I heard about it, and Phil Ox and I went to LA City Jail to meet Charlie's 3 lawyers. We met Gypsy and Squeaky, 2 of the Manson family not in jail, and they were out of sight. Squeaky is tiny with a squeaky voice, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a face and smile you'd trust. She's supposed to have offed a couple of people, but I don't believe it. Squeaky? No. She told me she was once a married secretary working in San Francisco who took a walk through Haight-Ashbury, met Charlie by accident, and never returned to her job or husband. The lawyers arrived and told the pigs that Phil and I were material witnesses in the case. I had no identification, but that didn't seem to be a problem, and we were lightly searched and whisked into the jail. We were led to a glass-enclosed room with a table and 5 chairs. Someone had snuck a tape recorder under his jacket and was going to tape the meeting. Charlie entered. I tried to shake his hands or embrace. "No, you can't touch me," said Charlie, wise to the ways of prison. "Do you mind if I rap?" Charlie asked. We said no, and Charlie began a 3-hour rap, taking his hypnotic eyes off us and only stopping for a question or comment from us. I felt myself getting hypnotized by his penetrating eyes. Charlie's face showed the suffering of years behind bars. You could tell from his face that this guy had been through a lot. "Reuben, I am not of your world," he said. "I've spent all my life in prison. When I was a child, I was an orphan and too ugly to be adopted. Now, I am too beautiful to be let free. How can you judge me, America, after what you have done to me? America, I am you. You are me. I am your image in the mirror. I am whatever you make me out to be." After leaving Manson, Phil and I were visibly moved by his strength and personal magnetism. He was one of the most poetic and intense people we ever met, and he spoke from a world of experience we could not even imagine. His words and courage inspired us, and Phil and I felt great the rest of the day, overwhelmed by the depth of the experience of touching Manson's soul. Me speaking. So here we have another individual praising Charlie Manson, saying that they were in love with him and inspired by him. It is my personal opinion, dear listener, at this time that Ed Sanders was being blackballed by the Yippies because he wasn't a Manson groupie. Let's get to this last stretch with Timothy Wiley and Dr. Leary. After the dinner broke up, Leary insisted that Michael and I come up to Millbrook with him. I'd evidently hit it off with the doctor, so Michael and I climbed into his VW Bug and puttered up the West Side Highway. I wasn't quite prepared for what Leary had in mind for me. He started asking for my insights about people we both knew, and responded with a grunt, neither affirming or denying my observations. After a while, he moved on to people I didn't know, continuing to ask for my psychic perception of them. I must have passed his test, because by the time we arrived and had crept up the long, tree-lined avenue leading to the rambling mansion Dr. Leary had been given for his League for Spiritual Discovery, he asked us to stay with him in his Indian teepee, up on a grassy ridge in the woods behind the mansion. Dr. Timothy Leary appeared to have reached a watershed in his life. By this time, late in 1967, he was just starting to open his eyes to some of the more unfortunate consequences of his relentless promotion of LSD. In rejecting Aldous Huxley's advice to distribute the entheogen only to the artistic and social elites, Leary had become a willing prophet of the revolution for an entire generation. Millions of young people, most completely unprepared for the intensity of the experience, dropped acid and imagined the world would change. Many of us, and I include myself in this group, had absolutely terrifying early trips, along with all the transcendence. Some, a very few considering the overall numbers, couldn't cope with the avalanche of information and fell into psychosis. Haight-Ashbury was becoming an embarrassment. Kids were turning from acid to the harder drugs. The Golden Age delusion, so assiduously boosted by Leary, and which finally collapsed at the Altamont concert a couple of years later, was starting to dissolve for him. Under that wonderful, ever-optimistic smile was a much more troubled soul. I knew then why I'd been called into his life. He needed a confessor, someone outside his circle who would hear him out, all the guilt and fears of a lapsed Catholic, without judging him. A proud man, it was difficult for Leary to come to terms with his conflicting feelings. He wasn't doing acid, so he wasn't able to escape into transcendence, and, by testing me so thoroughly and prompting me to take this confessor role, he was tacitly acknowledging that I was not about to buy his bullshit. He was well aware I could see deeper than that. From my work as an empath, I knew all I needed to do was to guide him into being in touch with his deepest feelings about this matter. Slowly, Dr. Leary came through the emotional turmoil into a clarity of what to do next. He decided that the only option was publicly to come completely clean about what he'd seen happening with LSD since he had been publicizing it. He would turn around an entire generation. He would expose what he knew the CIA was doing with their MKUltra project, dosing unsuspecting American citizens with acid. The wisdom of tuning in, turning on, and dropping out had resulted in the chaos and desperation of Haight-Ashbury. Dropping out was all very well, if there was a splendid new world to drop into. So, what else would he put in place of LSD? What could he tell people to do once they had opened their minds? By this time, I would imagine a certain amount of psychological transference was taking place in the teepee. That can only account for what happened next. He'd learned something of our beliefs in the course of our time together, and evidently respected Michael and me enough to lay his heart bare. Something must have moved him, because he suddenly came to the decision to make joining the Process Church his next move. I suspect Michael might have been happier about this odd choice than I was. I simply couldn't see the doctor giving up everything to enlist with us. And if he did, I wasn't convinced that his ploy would work with the public. Who, or what, was the Process after all?
What goes up must come down. Spinning wheel, got to go round. Talking about your troubles, it's a crying sin. Ride a painted pony, let the spinning wheel spin. You got no money and you got no home. Spinning wheel, all alone. Talking about your troubles and you never learn. Ride a painted pony, let the spinning wheel turn. Did you find the directing sign on the straight and narrow highway? Would you mind a reflecting sign? Just let it shine within your mind and show you the colors that are real. Someone is waiting just for you. Spinning wheel, spin painted pony on the spinning wheel ride. Spinning wheel fly.
Timothy Wiley goes on to wax poetic about a Processian who was giving the speech at the Sabbath assembly with Leary, and how they had misidentified the current president of the United States, and it became blatantly obvious by Leary's face that he wasn't going to join the process. Timothy Wiley writes, "I knew in that moment we'd lost him. I didn't try to dissuade him when we were saying our goodbyes, and he slipped off into the night. Within a year, he was arrested again, this time for a couple of roaches, and his real problem started. I didn't see Dr. Timothy Leary again for 20 years. Me speaking. Whether any of that is true or not, I don't really know. That is for you to decide." The Dayton Daily News, Friday, May 10th, 1968. Students using raw power and the tactics of fascism. On the campus of Columbia University, where I visited earlier this week, there are all shades of opinion, a hangover of trauma from violence, and a theater of the absurd that makes the whole thing seem unreal. The voice on the bullhorn in the center of the campus grates endlessly on, occasionally surrendering to guest speakers. One, a long-haired, slender youth, introduced himself as Brother Benedict of the Church of the Final Judgment. It seemed a fairly definitive religion, and he certainly thought so. He came on in hippie talk, which seemed to stamp him as a square to the students. "Man, I want you to hear me good," he said. "This is a spiritual issue. We are, what are we?" To a student sitting near, "We are militant pacifists." He had some trouble with the pronunciation. "We got to do our thing together. We cannot do our thing separately." Some 700 youngsters, at least 1/4 of them non-students, had started Columbia's ordeal by seizing buildings and imprisoning administrators. Initially, they had drawn little sympathy from the other 17,000 students. But they held out until the university had to call the cops, and then there was fighting and some bloody heads. Now much of the student body seems to sympathize, at least a little, with the activists, and others are happy that they can cut classes and not be flunked. So the college is in paralysis, and the kids from the Students for a Democratic Society make a raw power bid to knock off one of the nation's great universities. Me speaking. We have another interesting character at Columbia, the Argus, May 16, 1968. Berkeley East, Columbia's tag. It was quite a week, the administration pondered. The faculty discussed, the students demanded, and the press made it into a carnival. Before it ended, a reporter pasted on the press office door a picture of columnist Jimmy Breslin reclining on the carpeted floor of the main administration building, trying in vain to look past his stomach. Obviously, I'm going to include Jimmy, the dog made me do it, Breslin from The Son of Sam.
No, there's no games playing here. Look at these headlines
of,
around. Do you think that there was no exaggeration of this case at all?
Work a little bit in the business, then come back and talk. You want to know about publishing that letter? You think that is there some question that letter shouldn't have been published? Is that the problem here? A letter from Berkowitz to Breslin shouldn't have been published.
Now you may be asking yourself, what does the process being in two different countries at a bare minimum with the Students for a Democratic Society and possibly later on the Weather Underground, we simply don't know. What does that have to do with anything? Without doing a full history of the SDS and Weather Underground, I just want to highlight some parallels between the process's belief system and theirs, and I believe that endorsement of Charles Manson becomes a much less edgier take than what they would like you to think. I will preface this by stating that an author decided to try to refute me and state that Bernadine Dorn denied saying any of this. When presented with her discussing it, they ended up backpedaling, which, again, I'm kind of used to this stuff by now.
Well, Professor Dorn, there have been some remarks attributed to you regarding the Manson murders that would seem to contradict.
One remark 45 years ago.
Right, I just wanted to see if...
I believe that it's important to take into consideration what the process calls the gray forces, and in light of the process's communication courses, what the Weather Underground detailed they would do with each other to challenge themselves to be better, to be more effective, and then the orgies.
I didn't think much of their philosophy, but there was one aspect of it with which I identified with, and that was their hostility towards the grey forces.
I think the best way to define what the gray forces are is to just read from process literature itself. This is number 4, the issue on sex.
John Gray's code is hypocrisy, mediocrity.
Are you tired of being a pawn for the gray forces?
Yeah, gray forces, I got that right away as a kid. Yeah, I know who those people are.
Have you the courage to fight against mass mediocrity? Would you like to spend half your life in heaven and half in hell instead of all of it in limbo? Are you sick of conforming?
The Greys were the middling, kind of lukewarm bourgeois.
Does your job give you a pain in the neck? Would you like to live a life of maximum intensity?
The Beatles had this song, "He's a real nowhere man." That's the gray description of the gray forces.
Are you bored? Did you know the gods had returned? Are you bored with being bored?
It was terribly important not to be grey, not to set out in life in such a way that you end up as a school teacher or a chartered accountant, all those things one suspected that in real life one was inevitably going to end up as.
Would you like to join the alliance between Jehovah and Lucifer to oust the gray forces? Is everyone around you beginning to take on the appearance of tired putty? Are you ceasing to care? Are you rapidly losing confidence in everything?
The Walking Dead. You see him getting the commuter trains every morning.
Are you ready for a new lease on life? Would you like to remove the murky blinkers that you wear as standard issue from the gray forces?
This is why zombie shows are really popular, because this is all people, that they know, right? It's their fathers, their mothers, Zombies, it's us. We're the zombies.
Would you like to know the universe instead of just one tiny corner of one tiny rubbish dump? Would you like to know the gods? Would you like to know the truth? Would you like to know? Join the process. Me speaking. So the gray forces are basically the man, right? That's my interpretation of it. While I think that it's very obvious with these new left movements in the 60s, they were anti-establishment, anti-gray forces, one could say. From Chicago Magazine, May 1993, the article states, in 1970, Bill Ayers summed up the weatherman philosophy: kill all the rich people, break up their cars and apartments, bring the revolution home, kill your parents. That's where it's really at.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
And now from the 1974 UK High Court records, the lawsuit with Ed Sanders. The court is going through a list of lectures that the process was holding, and it is cited twice that they held lectures titled "The Need to Kill Your Parents." Coincidence? Maybe, but I don't believe in coincidences. Now, we already discussed in the episode about Stuhl in regards to the communication courses and how they were making people sign waivers that if their mental health was affected, then they couldn't come after them. The Weather Underground, I would say, is a bit more of a Maoist struggle session type situation, but still very similar.
We developed all kinds of our own repertoire of psychological tricks, like something called the gut check, where we'd challenge each other to be more violent and to be therefore more revolutionary, or to be more disciplined, to give up our bourgeois luxuries.
Oh, Jesus, sometimes they just go all night and they'd pick out someone. It was, to me, it was just too cultish. There would be, people would go on and on about, well, first of all, there was smash monogamy. You know about that. Didn't have monogamous relationships.
Reading from My Life with the SDS and Weather Underground by Mark Rudd. The heart of collective life was the criticism, self-criticism session. The group would choose one person, attacking that individual's work and attitudes with the goal of helping him transform himself into a communist revolutionary. Individualism, ego, and weakness had to be rooted out. We had discovered this method from Fanshin by William Hinton, an American who lived and worked in China. The book was required reading in all collectives. One of our favorite passages from Fanshin, which we often quoted, justified our attempts to remake ourselves. The human consciousness may be compared to an artichoke. Its tender core is enclosed in layer upon layer of defenses, excuses, rationalizations, and approximations. These must be peeled off if one is to discover the true complex motives driving any individual. What made self-revelation possible for the work team members was the deep commitment every one of them had to the success of the land reform movement. They freely examined themselves and their comrades, not for partisan advantage, not for the sake of exposure, not as an exercise in mea culpa, but in order to remove obstacles in the way of more effective work. I remember one day walking into a self-criticism session at a collective in Park Slope, Brooklyn. A young man, a gentle, thoughtful person whom I had known at Columbia SDS was on the hot seat. He had violated some collective rules, such as needing permission from the collective to go and see an old friend or family member. The poor guy in the end broke down under the onslaught. Yes, he admitted he was a bourgeois. Yes, he had doubts as to whether we would win. Yes, he was a racist and sexist down deep. Me speaking, I would like to point out again a parallel from the Stuhl episode where you were not allowed to leave process headquarters. They called it the cardinal sin. Mark Rudd was elected SDS National Secretary in June of 1968. Mark writes, "Very quickly that summer, a new and startling line emerged from the Weather Women. Monogamies had to be smashed. Exclusive relationships between men and women were now seen as reinforcing the old patterns of female subservience. Women had to break out of the old ways, stand on their own 2 feet. Smashing monogamy was a response to a real problem. How are women going to make great gains in their liberation very quickly and become full revolutionaries, not subordinate to men or a man? The solution for many New Left women was to separate from the men and join all-female organizations. For the Weather women, the solution was to abolish monogamous relations, yet stay within the integrated anti-imperialist revolutionary organization. This was one of the few cases where a new line was not initiated by the Weather Bureau, which was how the leadership collective instantly had become known. The reason was simple. Except for Bernadine Dorn, the Weather Bureau was all men. Anyone who'd ever met her would recognize Bernadine as a star, intelligent, beautiful, commanding in a unique way through her warmth, empathy, and passion. I was proud just to be in her company. No other woman even approached her in her charisma. Me speaking sounds kind of like Marianne Grimston, am I right? Moving on. Mark Rudd continues, my fantasies were being fulfilled. I could have almost any of these beautiful, strong, revolutionary women I desired. It was a moment of extreme sexual experimentation. Group sex, homosexuality, casual sexual hookups were all tried as we attempted to break out of the repression of the past into the revolutionary future. The line on homosexuality is that women should get close to women, men to men. In a revolutionary collective, there should be no barriers between people. Mainly, women slept with women. This was openly allowed. Men were more repressed. And Mark Rudd goes on to detail what he terms internal taboo about someone's genitals that I'm not going to read. He continues, this homosexual experimenting had nothing to do with gay liberation. The organization was essentially male-oriented and macho, and a large number of gay men and women never came out of the closet in the Weathermen. I only learned about their suffering years later. In public and to people outside the organization, I explained smashing monogamy. Since sex is the ultimate intimacy in human relations, Weathermen are building political collectives bonded with this intimacy among all our members, not between monogamous couples. Our sexual ideology quickly proved to be disastrous. Smashing monogamy drove many good people out of the collective. Special relationships were criticized by the group as being corrupt. Instead of bonding people into a true collective, what we were doing created fragmentation and alienation. Weather sex was also a disaster for medical reasons. Gonorrhea, pelvic inflammatory disease, crabs, lice, and a non-specific genital infection we called weather crud were epidemic among us. Sympathetic doctors treated us with antibiotics and other drugs, yet we continued throughout the latter part of 1969. By early 1970, the spasm of indiscriminate sex was over. We were exhausted, and few of us, to my knowledge, ever looked back on the sexual experimentation with nostalgia. So we've got a gallon power, and we've got orgies.
Initially, there was celibacy, but then Marianne would trump that with various special arrangements.
I found out years later that, in fact, senior people have been participating in occasional staged orgies.
Yeah, they were orchestrated by Marianne.
They varied from great fun to being extremely confronting.
From Rebel Angels in Exile, Pleiadians, Watchers, and the Spiritual Quickening of Humanity. Timothy Wiley details how Marianne started enforcing arranged marriages between new processians known as children and established interprocessians, mother and father. He points out the possibly coincidental timing of the release of their Sex issue, featuring Jimmy Savile, in 1968, happening at the same time. Timothy Wiley writes, Marianne said that she would be deciding when and who would be having these sacred marriages, or absorptions, as they came to be called. In giving these week-long affairs a sacred gloss, she was able to keep firm tabs on who was having sex with whom, while at the same time implying it was a sacred duty for the various pairs not to have sex with one another at any other time. She finished by emphasizing that these absorptions were never to be talked about to outsiders, and that, for all intents and purposes, the community would, with these one-week exceptions, remain essentially celibate. Those who knew Marianne better had heard her justification for this sort of hypocrisy before, to wit, all spiritual paths, all mystery schools and religions, have their esoteric and exoteric elements. She spoke of how outsiders wouldn't understand the parent-child relationships, of how cruelly they would ridicule them, and use the ensuing scandal to discredit the process. She said it was a secret the elect would have to keep to themselves. It is worth noting this issue is where we are introduced to the rape game, which we will save for another time. Timothy Wiley goes on to detail his absorption with his spiritual daughter, and for some strange reason it involved the Beatles album Revolver. Timothy Wiley writes about some of the ensuing scandal. Marianne's announcement that masturbation was to become a holy duty had the predictable effect. So, I thought, is that how she's going to resolve the sexual pressure? The sexually charged atmosphere had been building steadily in the chapter as the various couples had their absorptions. It hadn't diminished, as Marianne might have hoped. The erotic energies floating around the chapter were most confusing for the public attending activities or eating in the cavern. Indeed, one celebrity, the Australian satirist Barry Humphries, mine host tells me, was heard to have asked, "When's the barefoot job going to begin?" making clear what he thought was going on. Marianne had stressed that the general public was to know nothing of any of the sexual activity going on inside. Outsiders were to continue to believe that all Processians were celibate, for if they ever learned the truth of what was really happening, they'd be sure to misinterpret it and make it the subject of ridicule. However, if Marianne had known to frame it this way, she might have added that esoteric sexual pursuits were also the very stuff of mystery schools. At least, this is how I observed mine host interpreting the information. Robert, always an expert with a pen in such situations, wrote a short ceremony to be intoned before the sacred act of masturbation, which wasn't intended to be an act of worship as much as a gift of energy to the god of choice. The act of masturbation was to be undertaken by the sacred couple and was presented as a way of sacrificing back to the gods the most intimate and personal offering a human being can make. And while we're not going to get into it here, dear listener, the first documented orgy between the process happened in Rome, but we know that Rome is getting its own episode.
Last night was a beginning for us. The ruling class in their gold-coast decadence will walk their streets a little less secure tonight. If they hadn't dug it before, they'd better dig it now. They are the enemy.
The weatherman SDS has been trying to give the impression that the Black Panthers are on their side, but the Panthers deny this.
We believe that the weatherman action is anarchistic, opportunistic, individualistic, it's chauvinistic, it's custoristic, and that's the bad part about it. It's custoristic in that its leaders take people into situations where the people can be massacred, and they call that revolution.
The Weathermen were convicted of countless crimes, and it's a topic that we will possibly revisit at another time.
There's no way to be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created. I'm not committed to nonviolence in any way.
Hopefully I have laid out a fair and digestible argument as to the similarities of these groups and the suspicious nature of the process, omitting that they were at Columbia. We're going to close out with Mark Rudd, My Life with the SDS and Weathermen. There were crazy discussions at Flint over whether killing white babies was inherently revolutionary, since all white people are the enemy. Out of this bizarre thinking came Bernadine's infamous speech praising Charles Manson and his gang's murder of actress Sharon Tate, her unborn child, and the LaBiancas. "Dig it," she exclaimed. "First they killed those pigs, then they ate dinner in the same room with them. They even shoved a fork into the victim's stomach. Wild." We instantly adopted as Weather's salute 4 fingers held up in the air, invoking the fork left in Sharon Tate's belly. The message was, we shit on all your conventional values, and there are no limits now to our politics of transgression.
Mama, let me be. Don't come
I think what has to be stared at is that they brought themselves, they were not brought, they brought themselves to that point. To what point? To the point at which they were ready to be mass murderers. This is mass murder we're talking about. They came to this conclusion, which is the conclusion that was come to by all the great killers, whether Hitler or Stalin or Mao, that they have a grand project for the transformation and purification of the world. And in the face of that project, ordinary life is dispensable. They joined that tradition.